The country of Guyana has over 100,000 open job positions right now. And
Crazy.
they're going to the U.S. and saying, we have jobs, come back. And they're literally coming to the U.S. saying like, come on guys, come back to our country. We got opportunity.
The moment that we hopped on the plane and took off and flew into the interior, I realized right away why this is such a big part of their growth going forward. There are no roads into the interior. The president wants a 10x tourism by 2030. That's one of the big visions of where he wants to go with it. And so there's a lot of excitement about opening up some of the interior of the country, ecotourism, and diversifying from this boom that they've had with the oil bonanza. Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 12 of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. My name's Austin Bronner. I'm here with Cody Shirk. What's up, Cody? How you doing?
Yo, how are you? Good to be back.
I haven't really had much time to debrief since the honeymoon. How was your time in Mexico?
Mexico, as always, is good. I feel like it's a home away from home for me. And there's so many parts of Mexico now that are, I mean, they're being gentrified, but they're almost like sister cities of the US. You go there and you're like, I'm in Mexico, but I'm still kind of in the US. Everyone's speaking English here, using the US dollar. It's expensive.
I mean, you were in San Diego South.
Yeah, exactly. Cabo, San Diego South. And my heart is in Mexico. I love it there, but obviously Cabo is not like real Mexico. I mean, it's in Mexico, but it's not like, the heart of Mexico.
It's not, but it is nice. It's nice. It's great food. All the fun things down there. But I'm fired up today because we are going to kind of recap. So we had this epic experience. We went back down to Guyana, and then you came back, flew straight to Cabo, and now we're kind of getting back together to debrief this trip. It was epic. We recorded an episode, actually the first episode of this podcast. We talk about going to Guyana on Cody's investor trip earlier this year, and then we went back about 2 weeks ago. That's been a crazy couple weeks. Back down to Guyana, and we landed late on Saturday night. We woke up the next morning. We flew deep into the interior, visited Kaieteur Falls, visited another waterfalls, flew over the Amazon, flew over the jungle there, and then the next day had a bunch of meetings and met the president of Guyana to talk about a real estate deal. It was a freaking whirlwind trip, and a really epic trip. And yeah, man, tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it was a whirlwind. It was one of those 2 weeks. And I was in Guyana last minute. We flew down there late at night, red-eye flight. I was there for, 2 days, 3 days?
I 2 days, yeah.
And I saw a ton of the country in 2 days, but it was one of those hellacious travel schedules. Flew back, went to Mexico, flew back again. I was in D.C., and I've been like all over the place. So I'm kind of reeling from the whole experience. But yeah, the time we spent in Guyana was a much more deeper dive than our first trip. And also we met with some very influential people, which we'll talk about in just a second. And it gave me a completely different perspective on what the opportunities there are in the country, how to access them, and also what the longer term effect is going to be on these opportunities.
Give me your top 2 takeaways.
Tourism, ecotourism is so unbelievably untapped that it's hard to explain, which is it's drop dead gorgeous, but at the same time, very difficult to access. So Whoever can unlock that, whoever figures that out is going to crush it. The second thing is that there's just nobody there doing anything. Yes, there's the oil industry. Yes, there's people focused on that. But outside of that, it's wide open. There's so much opportunity. It's almost hard to pick something to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty blown away by taking off. We hopped on a flight and flew out deep into the interior of the country to Kaieteur Falls, and you take off, and less than 5 minutes after you're off the ground, everything civilization-wise disappears, and you're just over jungle. And it's that way for roughly 40 minutes as you go deeper, and all you're really seeing, the occasional mine, rivers, and then just endless jungle. And for me, one of the big things that hit was just how large and how unexplored, not going to say unexplored, but undeveloped their interior of their country is, and how it's just this deep jungle, and there's so many interesting things going on there. And I really couldn't understand that until I was on a plane.
Yeah, and I think both you and I are pretty well-traveled people, as many people are listening to this podcast, and Most places you go around the world, when you're flying over a place, you see some roads or some villages here or there. And our flight, we'll roll some other footage so you can see what we're talking about here. There were some little tiny settlements here and there, like when I say a settlement, like literally like a lean-to house or something.
Yeah.
But to access those homes is either by river or by a plane on a little grass landing strip, and then you hike somewhere. So it's not only remote.
And there weren't that many of those, right? Like you're not seeing landing strips everywhere. You're seeing very few of them.
Right, but not only is it remote, but you can't drive to almost all these places. So you got to have that air access or the river access. And then once you're there, there's nothing there. So it's very difficult to kind of comprehend until you're there and see it. But your mind starts to race and go, well, if this gets unlocked, if people can get access to this area, like, whoa, there's huge opportunity here.
My other takeaway was Kite Tour Falls specifically was absolutely spectacular. And for me, it kind of felt like arriving at like a Yosemite or some sort of a national park in the US before it's been developed at all, right? We've got all of our national parks, which are beautiful in the US, and they've got roads, they've got lodges, they've got campgrounds, they've got trails. It's like arriving at one of those before there's anything. There's no trails, there's no places to stay. But you can look around and you can feel like you're in this incredible lost world type experience. So that was a big takeaway from me. I want to kind of dive in here and just revisit why we're interested in Guyana and why I think you might be interested in Guyana if you're listening to this podcast. Just run through some stats. Like Guyana is home to the fastest growing economy in the world. It has been the fastest growing economy for the last 2 years. I think in 2023, there was 38% growth, and it's expected to be kind of a similar level in 2024. They discovered oil in 2015. Most recent estimates that are changing all the time because they keep discovering more and more. It's around 11 billion barrels of oil, and that number could increase as, again, they're exploring actively right now. A couple other interesting things about Guyana. It's a 4-hour direct flight from Miami. It's also a 6-hour direct flight from Houston. Those are 2 flights that have been put in recently, and I mean, my flight from Houston was like 80% full. I don't know about your flight from Miami.
Oh, my flight, I've flown several times to Guyana. It's jam-packed every single flight. In fact, Miami flight, which is American Airlines, they've increased it to 2 flights a day.
2 flights a day now.
2 flights a day, and it's 4 hours, but actually, I think I got there in like 3.5 hours. I don't know if we had tailwinds or something, but it like wasn't that bad. It was one of those flights you kind of get settled in, read half your book, and then like you're like, oh, we're landing. And it's just weird to think that I'm going from the U.S. to deep in South America, or not deep, but like deep in the jungles of South America. And you get there, visa on arrival. The immigration process is super simple. You don't have to apply for any paperwork prior to traveling. And it's like flying to a U.S. state, more or less. You're going across the country. It's not that big of a deal.
No, it really, really painless. And again, one of the last things I'll mention is that the president wants a 10x tourism by 2030. That's one of the big visions of where he wants to go with it. And so there's a lot of excitement about opening up some of the interior of the country to ecotourism and diversifying from this boom that they've had with the oil bonanza.
Yeah, and I'll add a couple more data points because you mentioned the amount of oil that's there. And for me, I'm not a deep oil guy, but when I hear billions of barrels, I'm kind of like, whatever, that's like monopoly money numbers to me. To quantify a little bit better for investors, their GDP has tripled since 2019. And what that means for individuals in Guyana on a per capita basis, their annual income has gone from about $10,000 a year to $40,000 a year. Now, to be fair to the Guyanese, that doesn't mean that every single person's now making $40,000 per year. In fact, there's actually a huge discrepancy there on who's actually getting the money. But the thought and attempt for the government right now is to create opportunities for people in Guyana to get a hold of that booming economy, whether they're starting businesses or working with companies moving into the area, import, export. We'll dive into it in a second, but that's, I think, the opportunity to understand is this economy is booming and they need help, and the opportunity is there. You just got to go there and start knocking on doors.
And one other unique aspect about Guyana, which we talked about in the first episode, is they have a very low population. So what does that mean? They don't have a lot of unskilled or skilled workers to do a lot of the stuff, a lot of the development. So what's happening is they're bringing in a lot of people from like expats from other countries to do the both skilled and unskilled labor to develop the country. So
yeah, 800,000 people in the country, and the Guyanese government just went to New York to put on a job fair because the country of Guyana has over 100,000 open job positions right now. And they're going to the U.S. and saying, hey, you're Guyanese and you're you're living in the U.S., like come back to the country. We have jobs. Come back. And they're literally coming to the U.S. saying like, come on, guys, come back to our country. We got opportunity. You never hear about that.
No, and I think I think the number I heard was that there's 2 million Guyanese living abroad. So from the tourism perspective, that's also another factor of many people are actually coming back to Guyana now to check out a place that they had left or their ancestors had left.
And it's interesting, when we were there traveling in the interior on the flights, I would say half the people we saw were Guyanese, and they were wealthy Guyanese, either from Guyana or from the U.S. coming back to visit their homeland. I haven't been here for 30 years. I'm going to see what's going on. And you would think
my flight in from Houston was, I would say, 40% like oil workers and the rest Guyanese. So very interesting.
So yeah, one of the other things that was fascinating for me was the government when we met with them, which we can dive into in a second, is their priority is to hire Guyanese, but they're also open to whoever. They alluded to us like, we just need people. We need people to come and boots on the ground. Let's get this done.
There's a lot of opportunity in Guyana. There's opportunity to do business down there, to invest, to be involved anywhere where there's money is being shifted because oil has been discovered. There's lots of opportunity. So if you're listening to this, you're interested in doing business in Guyana or other emerging markets, we do consulting. So you can email us at consulting@adventurecapitalist.com. Let's get into what we saw on the ground and what we think are some of the biggest opportunities that we took away from this last trip to Guyana. So I'm going to start with number one, aviation. Now, I'm going to make this as a broad category because this is really, really evident when you're on the ground and when you start flying into the interior. I didn't really get it at first. The first trip down there, we actually looked at a couple of investments in the aviation space. I didn't really understand because, you're in Georgetown, you're like, well, why is this going to be such a big part of the growth story of Guyana? The moment that we hopped on the plane and took off and flew into the interior, I realized right away why this is such a big part of their growth going forward. And it's one of the things we alluded to. There are no roads into the interior. I think that there's one, and it's still being developed. And so the only way to get from Georgetown into the interior, which is the vast majority of the country, is to fly. And they don't have enough airlines. They don't have enough pilots. And right now, some of the airlines that are servicing the interior, I would categorize them as being a little bit sketchy and being completely understaffed with pilots. So, for example, if you want to get 2 pilots on an aircraft to go into the interior, it's really, really challenging because they only have enough for 1 pilot to go into the interior. And there's almost no flights in the U.S., commercial flights, that are serviced by 1 pilot.
Yeah, and let me give some context to this, because when you say airlines, this isn't like a Boeing 737 flying into the middle of the country. These are Cessna Caravans, which is a single turboprop plane, hold 12 people, and there's a possibility to do 2 pilots. There's 2 navigation seats in the front. But they only have 1. I mean, we were sitting in the front seat. I was sitting on the front seat for the flight in, and then you were sitting in the front seat.
Cody was responsible for saving our life on the way out, and I was responsible for saving our life on the way back.
And our pilot was Nicaraguan. He wasn't even Guyanese or American. No. He came from Nicaragua because he was like, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity here. I get paid pretty well. And there's just not enough airplanes, pilots, or flights daily to service the demand right now.
And I will say, our pilot was like a Nicaraguan astronaut. Like, he was jacked. He had high and tight cut. I'm like, all right, if there's just going to be 1 pilot, I'm glad it's him.
Oh, I trusted him completely. But it was just kind of like, wow, you came from Nicaragua to Guyana? That's just like a very strange route for a pilot.
One other thing that was interesting, conversation we had with people, is that one of the struggles with, let's say, tourism, for example, getting into the interior, is that a lot of these commercial flights are getting canceled last minute because they're getting better offers to go pick up gold miners somewhere deep in the interior. And so there's that aspect of it as well. There's so few planes and there's so few pilots that there's bids going on, and they're like, well, just cancel your flight for the day. Come and pick us up. We've discovered gold. We got to fly it out of here. And they're willing to spend more money to move the gold than it is to fly people out, let's say, to Kaitoura Falls or to some of the other waterfalls, or do a tourism flight. That whole category is very interesting to me. It's like you could start an airline, bring a plane down there. You could just be a pilot and move down there, and I guarantee you'll get a job because they're in desperate need. So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and I would say also the bigger picture here is the government knows there's an issue here. They want to support growing the aviation industry. No matter how quickly they build the roads, I would say even for the next several decades, they won't be able to catch up. The land down there is so freaking diverse. It's hard to imagine. The rivers are not like throw a rock across the river. These rivers are like miles wide. So even if they were to start construction on a bridge today, we're talking a decade before they're able to crisscross the country. And that doesn't even include the fact that we flew for an hour and barely made like our way into like a third of the country. Like you could fly for a while and not even see another thing for a while.
To your point, Cody, about why it's so challenging to build roads down there, because it's not like the American West, right? If you're laying asphalt through Texas, through Arizona, you don't really need to chop down any trees. You can just lay asphalt. You have to, clear some brush. If you're building a road there, you are cutting down rainforest and hauling it out, and there's nowhere for it to go, right? You're either burning it. So for them to build a road, it's going to take much longer. It's going to be more expensive than you can even imagine in your mind, thinking about how roads are typically built in a developed nation, or even in a non-developed nation.
And we'll move on to the next topic. But my number one idea for somebody who's listening to this, wants to be an entrepreneur in the aviation industry of Guyana, is to build a software platform and allows a passenger to book a flight with one of these airlines. And there's like 4 or 5 private airlines. And again, we call them airlines, but they're just these small companies with a bunch of Cessnas. And if there was a platform for you to go on and book a seat, that would be like a light year step ahead. Right now, as it goes, you go to the airport and you just start talking to them and like trying to broker a seat on the plane. And then an hour before the flight, they might be like, "Oh, sorry, we canceled a flight," or "Oh, sorry, we sold it to somebody else." It's a total wide open. And the irony there is, it's kind of funny. It's actually like the ultimate capitalist market right now. It's just like fly by the seat of your pants. Whoever's paying the most and whatever has the most demand, we're going to go with.
You might be able to get into the interior if a gold miner doesn't buy your seat before you get out there.
Exactly.
So let's go to number 2. We'll stay in the tourism space, and we'll go with boutique hotels. Why boutique hotels, Cody?
So when you go to Guyana as a tourist or as somebody coming from outside the U.S. into Guyana, the expectation is, if you're not going there like purely as a corporate interest, you're going there for a vacation, you're going there to experience the community. You want to stay in a place that reflects what Guyana is, right? You don't want to stay in a sterile like prison style Hilton or Marriott. You want to be in a boutique hotel. And so we have gone down there a couple times now, and we've stayed at a couple of different places, and we've noticed there's really only one player in the game right now, and that's a Cara Lodge, which is this old historical hotel. It's very cool. But that's like the only boutique cool spot where you feel like you're staying in Guyana. And the demand there, it's really expensive. The hotel rooms per night are very expensive. And the first time we went, we couldn't even stay there. It was booked out. And the second time we went there, it was pretty much jam-packed. So I think there's a huge opportunity in the boutique hotel hospitality sector for Georgetown.
And specifically, one of the reasons why I think it's interesting is that there's a lot of hotels that are being built currently. And those hotels are business hotels. And they're, like you said, Marriott's. There's a Qatari hotel that's being built. It's going to be massive with a conference room. All these business-focused hotels. So my expectation is the price of business hotels is going to drop, right? The Marriott's going to go from $500 a night down to, let's say, $300 a night or $250 a night as more inventory comes online. The reason why I think boutique hotels are interesting is because there's not the same competition for the boutique hotels. They're not being built. There's not a focus on the tourism market, which is going to grow. Some of the things that come along with boutique hotels, like the food, the services, those sorts of things, I think will be very, very lucrative.
Yeah, those business hotels are going to be more or less commoditized, as you said. They're going to be on a platform, and you'll know what the best rate is. You'll go there, you'll get your bottle of water and reliable maid service, and that's about it.
Do you care if you stay in a Marriott or an Aiden or no, you don't care. They're the same. A Radisson, they're all the same.
It's whatever your corporate company has.
It's whatever you got points with. That's the loyalty. Let's go into number 3. So 3 is kind of a large one, which we'll expand on a little bit, but and we touched on it a little bit. It's just building roads and bridges. I'll kind of dive into my take on it. It's similar to what I felt with aviation. I didn't really understand the scope of it before flying over the interior of the country. And as you take off from Georgetown, like you said, about 5 minutes out, and you realize, you're like, wow, there's almost no way to get into the interior. Like, you just think about how every other country I've been to, you want to go somewhere, you have a choice. You either choose between you drive there, it takes longer, or you can fly. Here, there isn't that choice. You have to fly, or maybe you can find some combination of driving and then floating up a river and then driving again, but that's very unlikely. My expectation over the next decade to 15 years is that there's just going to be consistent building of roads, bridges all through the interior. What about you, Cody?
Absolutely. And I think, as I listen to that, hear the opportunity, I'm like, I'm not a road builder or I'm not a bridge builder, but I'm thinking to myself, okay, what are the second or third level opportunities here? And one that immediately sticks out to me is construction equipment. Like, oh, well, they're going to need equipment. And when we're in Guyana, yes, there's lots of heavy equipment and tractors, but it mostly services the oil industry right now. So I can imagine over the coming years, there's going to be this influx of infrastructure, supplies, and people to build these roads. A couple data points. ExxonMobil invested into Guyana over $2 billion in 2022. And a lot of that money went to infrastructure projects like sewage treatment plants, like roads, like bridges, like education. So the money is there. It's not so much the funding issue. It's more about how the government's going to contract with reliable contractors who can get things done. So I think for somebody who's like, oh, I'm not a road or bridge builder, well, you take a couple levels away from that and think, well, what do they need to build these roads and bridges? And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait, there actually are opportunities for me to go down there and get involved in these projects.
Well, then also back that up again, and you start looking at who are the companies getting contracts for these? Can I invest in them, right? Can I do some research and find as the contracts get granted to, let's say, foreign companies, U.S. companies or European companies, whoever's going to be the ones that are actually going to be doing the building of these roads, there's a lot of growth that's going to happen down there. And if you kind of pay attention to who's getting the contracts, there's some opportunities to invest. And that, again, not investment advice or anything like that, just things I'm thinking about as I look at where they are currently in the interior with the number of roads and bridges that they've been building to where they need to go. There's just a long, long road.
Yeah, one quick example is where we heard from a company I think they're out of Singapore, who's trying to import temporary housing into Guyana for these road workers. So they're setting up these temporary housing facilities in the middle of the jungle, so the workers building the roads have somewhere to stay. And this one company out of Singapore is simply working on importing basically these little modular homes. That has nothing to do with roads or bridges on the surface level. But then once you realize, oh, wait, the workers need somewhere to stay while they're building these roads, you're like, oh, wait, the government has to pay for these housing facilities. Oh, and ExxonMobil is paying $2 billion a year to pay for stuff like this.
And you always hear, somebody makes money doing something like selling porta potties to Saudi Arabia or whatever. You always hear these stories, and it's something like that.
The picks and shovels of the industry.
The picks and shovels. Always more interesting. Okay, number 4.
I want to talk about that story for 10 seconds. The porta potty story, that's a Jeffrey Kent story. So Jeffrey Kent, founder of Abercrombie and Kent, who is somebody we'll probably talk about more in the future. That's one of his kind of side hustles. I'm using air quotes because he actually crushed it. Was providing porta potties in the Middle
Saudi
East.
Arabia.
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia.
I think it was like 1970. He went over there when they discovered oil and started to look at opportunities. And he had a travel company at the time, a safari company that was still small, and he needed to make more money to be able to expand the safari company, which was his real passion. And so goes to Saudi Arabia and starts realizing that they don't have porta potty, like public kind of toilets for a lot of the oil workers that are coming in to do the work there. Makes some calls, gets connected with a U.S. company, starts importing these toilets, and then becomes like the player putting in all these porta potties, and then also realizes that the same people who are using the toilets don't have any ice cream, and it's incredibly hot. So he makes some other calls to some people in the UK and buys like 3 or 6 of these ice cream trucks, imports them, and starts running an ice cream route and servicing the local Saudis and the oil workers, and absolutely crushes it until the government decides they want to take his route from him. So,
well, he made enough money until the government said, "Hey, you're making too much money. I'll take it from you." But talk about top to bottom investing, from like the input to the output, the ice cream to the shitter. Man, he saw some opportunity there and took advantage. So good for him.
For sure. Let's go to number 4. So number 4 is kind of this category of what I call like day trips and services in Georgetown. Cody, you want to expand on this? Why is this interesting?
So the demand that we noticed, and it wasn't that we passively noticed this, people kept like coming to us and saying this, is people are there for business for a day or two. And these are individuals either working in the oil industry or any of the industries we've just mentioned. And many of them bring their families because they're there for a week, 2 weeks. So they have wife, kids, and they're in Georgetown, and there's nothing to do. There's literally nothing to do other than maybe stay in your little hotel compound, make your family go crazy trying to pass the day. So there's these day trip opportunities, whether it's a drive from the city just a couple hours outside to maybe a cool little area on the river or in the jungle or sightseeing. I'm sure there's tiny companies right now doing it, but we didn't really find any. And we just noticed just in our direct circle that everyone's like, what do we do for the day?
Totally. And, well, there's a couple things. So let's talk about the day excursions. So there's a couple unique aspects around Guyana right now. So one of them is that all the flights back to the U.S. and that most of the large international flights are going to the U.S. They leave in the middle of the night. So they leave at like 12:30, 1 a.m. So the airport is packed. And part of that is because apparently the fees are cheaper for people to leave in the middle of the night. What happens, though, is people have to check out of their hotel early. So say they come down for, let's say, 3 days. One of those days, they're going to be on the ground in Georgetown, have to check out of their hotel at like 11 o'clock, and they've got the entire day waiting for that flight. Servicing that type of a person, where they say, hey, if you're flying out, we can get you into the Amazon, into the jungle to go do something cool and then come back, and you've got, take your luggage or you can leave it at the hotel. That's a great opportunity because there's so many of those people that are just waiting all day, and really there's not much compelling to do in Georgetown right now. Outside of that, like spas, you think about most tourist destinations and business hotels, they usually have like spas or services. So even if somebody checks out of the hotel, they can hang out and get a massage before their flight or whatever. There's just like not many personal services that are for those people that are sticking around all day. And again, when you think about the number of people that are flying in and out, my flight out was 80% full as well, right? So every single day you've got thousands of people that are flying in and out, and they're going to be stuck with nothing to do in Georgetown for the day. So that's something that you can
I think in the US we may call them like personal services or activities, but to be fair, in most markets this would be almost like a luxury market type thing. And like one thing I think about is women who get their nails done, like a mani-pedi. And I know when I go with my wife somewhere, like she'll go do in other countries because it's usually like this kind of pastime and it's kind of cheap. Like that just doesn't exist in Georgetown. There may be some ones we don't really know about, but there's nothing really catering to that market of people coming in there right now. And I don't know what prices you could charge. You could probably charge like US prices right now.
Sure.
But any of those types of activities, I think, is wide open for an entrepreneur who's already in Guyana thinking about opening something up. It's like, hey, cater to this market right now. Or somebody who's like, hey, I want to go down and have this adventure and then cater to this influx of tourists and business people who are, by the way, not afraid to whip out some dough. They'll pay a premium for any of this stuff. It's pretty attractive right now, and zero competition that we've seen.
For sure. Let's go to number 5, which kind of pairs with this last one, which is boat trips and transportation. So I think there's a wide range, just like aviation, of opportunities to expand on. Let's just start at the smallest level, which is pairing with what we previously said. A boat trip from Georgetown up the river, a day trip to go check things out, right? That's very, very interesting and compelling. There's not many people doing that. I couldn't really find anyone that is giving an interesting, unique tour of the river. While that is very clearly one of the coolest things in Guyana, especially from if you're in Georgetown. So there's that, all the way up to more deeper transportation, all the way up into, from more of a practical perspective of shipping things up, to river cruises. Those are some of the things I was thinking about. What are your thoughts on the boat trip / transportation opportunity in Guyana?
Yeah, I think this is like a reoccurring trend. We've talked about it almost every episode we talk about Guyana, which is this transportation challenge. And to be clear, there are some little services there, but they're mostly more catering to, I would say, the historical local community. So these are often aimed at like pretty industrial, agricultural positioned boats.
Yeah.
They're pretty rough. They're pretty, let's just say, rough around the edges. But the other thing that's very difficult is that there's no web presence anywhere of any of this stuff. So if you Google search something, or you're trying to find a website to get information about this boat transportation or this van transportation, you don't really have any information because it's all WhatsApp down there. It's everyone, talk to this buddy, my buddy will connect you to this buddy. So if you're not really connected to that in crowd, you're stumbling around. So I think the opportunity, what you're asking and what I think is very relevant, is setting up these transportation services that are very clear in the service they provide through web presence, and then also providing a service or a boat or a vehicle that actually caters to this new clientele of tourists that are going to be there.
Makes it easy for them to get around. You can go online, like you said, get clear about where you want to go, and then you fulfill it, right? Like that's an opportunity, just fulfilling the transportation needs that are very challenging in this growing country with a massive, beautiful jungle.
Yeah. And by the way, there's no Uber there. So everyone's out thinking like, why don't I get a taxi or get Uber? That's even difficult.
It's sketchy.
Totally
the taxis
we almost got
we were...
we had one night that we got in a sticky situation. A quick story in that we had dinner at this Indian restaurant. What was that restaurant called?
Agman.
Oh man,
incredible
like
food.
Some of the best Indian food I've ever had. A large portion of the Guyanese population is Indian, so incredible Indian food there. But we wanted a taxi afterwards to get back to our hotel, and we had the restaurant call us a taxi, and the taxi pulls up, and it's not a marked taxi. So we're like, is this a guy that is actually the service?
Yeah, or is he impersonating them? Yeah.
Yeah, and the communication was just really rough between us. He ends up taking us to like the wrong spot. Austin and I kind of had that like the street sense feeling like, oh my God, is this guy going to take us to an alley and rob us right now? And
first off, it was weird because he's driving with his right hand, and then he's live streaming competitive pool in his left hand on his iPhone. And then when we ask him questions, he just kind of yells at us. So we're like, this whole experience is so weird.
Yeah, he would have not been an Uber approved driver.
No.
And
One
that's
star.
not to mention that he was like Tokyo Drift or Guyana Georgetown Drift. It was like aggressive driving. But anyway, the point is that if you can just have like a reliable driver with a car that is catering to tourists, even if it's a one person shop setting up there, you would do very, very well.
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, like our whole point with this is to just share a little bit more about what we've experienced when we're down there. There are a lot of things. Again, when we come back every time, we're like, wow, there are a lot of opportunities down here and a lot of challenges. It feels more dangerous in some places than you'd expect. The transportation we mentioned is a massive challenge. But where there are challenges, there are always opportunities. And one thing that's very clear is that you have a government that is getting paid a lot of money by Exxon and some of the other oil producers to facilitate the extraction of oil from their country. And they have a lot of money, and they have a high desire to develop other industries in their country to make sure that as this country develops and progresses, that it doesn't just boom from the oil and then bust. So that's the exciting part. And yeah, I think both of us feel every time we leave there, we're like, wow, there's a lot of stuff happening down here.
And I think a lot of the feedback we've gotten over the past couple of months of people hearing who are going to Guyana is very negative, right? People saying like, oh, what are you doing down there? It's corrupt. Yeah. Oh, you're going to buy real estate. You're going to lose your land or whatever it is. First of all, that's part of the opportunity, is that the majority of people do not want to go there. They do not want to get involved. So just hearing that feedback for me, as someone I've invested in foreign markets for almost 2 decades now. Anytime I start to hear that, I'm like, oh, I'm on to something good, because most people are not going to be following this opportunity. Investing in Guyana or getting involved right now, it does not mean that you have to put yourself in a position where you are explicitly dependent on, let's say, the long-term success of a real estate project. And what I'm getting at is there's these contracts or these opportunities to work with the government, to work with the people, to go get paid or go get involved in this industry without an enormous amount of long-term risk there, which is for a new entrepreneur is a pretty exciting thing to get involved in.
Totally. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are interested in doing business in Guyana or other emerging markets, email us at consulting@adventurecapitalist.com and we can chat. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Give us some feedback and hit us up on Twitter. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Guyana. Thank you for listening.
See ya.